The Sentinel sat alone at a counter a few days later, head in his arms and elbows on the countertop. His leg was shaking and his eyes were dry. Despite the sunless sky of Janistar, he knew he'd been awake all night. His mind was weak. He didn't want to retread exactly what he'd done before in the First War. He didn't want any more loss, senseless fighting, or meaningless negotiation. All he wanted was to enjoy the gift of time travel. War was on the horizon, even a blind man could see it. The Sentinel wanted nothing to do with it, but he knew avoiding it would be the irresponsible thing to do. "You're stressed." A deep voice called to the Sentinel. He lifted his head, tilting it in the direction he heard the voice, and froze in place when he saw it. "Death?" he asked. "What do you want? Why are you here?" The dark, brooding bird perched himself on the kitchen counter, watching over the Sentinel. "You should fight for your people. They look up to you. You saved them. It's your job to save them, whether it's a self-given title or not. You aren't the Sentinel for nothing." Death stood and shook a leg. "Why are you telling me this? Who sent you?" "You're paranoid." Death craned his neck. "I come as an acquaintance. Here to help, is all. You don't have much time." "What?" The Sentinel was taken aback by the message coming from Death himself, worried at its implications, fearing the worst. "What do you mean?" "You understand that a war is imminent, correct?" Death asked. "Yeah, of course, who doesn't? But why are you telling me this? Why would the Extraverse care about a war this small?" "I think my being here should be a testament as to how not small-scale this war will be. Be prepared," Death warned. He flapped his wings and flew over closer to the Sentinel, landing on the counter in front of him. He let his wings droop down over the counter edge, and his deep red eyes stared into the Sentinel's, his small head right up in his face. The Sentinel backed away slightly. "Personal space," he mumbled. "Conchna isn't your worry. This door isn't your worry. Your threat is unseen, unknown by you. By me." The Sentinel's face shifted with curiosity. "And you?" Death hesitated, as if he was thinking about what he wasn't allowed to say. "Fear the empty throne. Heed Rogar's warning. The banished god is gaining strength." Death hissed his warning in a raspy whisper, his eyes glowing with fear as his whole body shook as if he had been thawed from a quick freeze. "Tell me more," the Sentinel demanded with a rasp whisper. He found himself leaning in closer, trying to understand Death. Death hesitated once more before he opened his beak to speak. "I'm sorry. I can't." "Why?" the Sentinel asked. "It seems like all of our problems could be solved if you just told me." "And you don't think the rest of us think so too? But we must obey time's rules, or we'll be banished, sending the multiverse into further disarray without the emissaries it so desperately needs. Or worse. I can't tell you what we aren't allowed to say or not, but I think I can bend the rules enough to let you know why. If you can figure it out yourself, that's on you." "Then why?" the Sentinel pressed. "Time is afraid." What could a being like her fear? She's basically a god. The Sentinel shook his head, confused. "Precisely," Death hissed. "Oh." The Sentinel leaned away. "Time is ashamed, and in denial. She thinks there's a way to stop." Death thought over his choice of words carefully. "To be safe without any interference. Confrontation. I don't think her mind will change until you show her there is a larger threat imminent. You have to convince her. I can't. Celeste can't." "How do I do that? Why would she trust my judgment?" The Sentinel stood up. He could tell that Death was getting ready to leave. "Go back to Ilsos. Confront Vistor and Concha about Project Rhey." "I don't get it. What do they have to do with the multiverse?" "They don't. Project Rhey does." Death lifted his wings in the air and pushed. As he lifted backwards, a wormhole opened between him and the Sentinel. "Good luck. Save us." Death said as his goodbye as he flew through the wormhole, presumably back to the Extraverse. Just as the wormhole closed, so too did a door in the hallway behind the Sentinel. "Who are you talking to?" Quinn asked, taking her hand off the handle of the guest room door. She came into the living room to greet the Sentinel. "Get dressed, we're going to Ilsos again." "Why?" Quinn asked. "Good news, I hope?" "Let's hope," the Sentinel said, throwing on his coat. He held out his calcareous arm and tapped his finger onto his palm, onto the center of the box. A ringing sound came from it as he paced the room. Quinn put her boots on and hopped into the living room with a black hoodie over one arm. "Hello?" Foxtrot answered the call. "Foxtrot, is Vax there?" the Sentinel asked. "She's not far, why?" "I need both of you to come to Ilsos with me. Meet me in front of Vistor's palace." "What for?" Foxtrot asked. "We're confronting them about Project Rhey. The Death Master came by and told me to look into it, said it could be a threat on a way bigger scale than we're thinking." Foxtrot didn't say a word. "Hello?" the Sentinel asked after a long silence. Quinn looked at him with a raised brow. "Did you get that?" "Yeah, I'll be over." Foxtrot ended the call and the box dimmed. The Sentinel shrugged and held out his hand for Quinn. She grabbed it and the two of them flashed away, appearing on the steps of Vistor's palace at the same time Vax and Foxtrot showed up. "Good morning," Vax smiled. "Let's hope so." The Sentinel turned and kicked open the palace doors. The four of them charged into the palace. "Vistor!" The Sentinel yelled for the king. "Vistor?" he called out again. When they approached the throne atop the stairs, they stopped. Conchna sat across the throne, his legs over one of the armrests. Using the other to support his back, he sat polishing his scythe. He barely turned his eyes to see the group standing before him. Vistor isn't home. Playing king, are you? Foxtrot asked. Nice arm, Sentinel. Conchna ignored Foxtrot. Don't get too attached to it. Why don't you come down here and talk to us like a man? Foxtrot yelled. Foxtrot, didn't see you there. How's your friend? Still dead? Conchna smirked. Foxtrot pushed forward, as did the Sentinel. Quinn reached out to hold Foxtrot back just as Vax did the same for the Sentinel. Control yourselves, boys. There's enough of me to go around. What do you want? Conchna asked, leaning his scythe against the back of the throne and sitting up straighter. Project Rhey. The Sentinel stepped forward, calmly. What is it? You already know what it is, unless you want me to pull out the Rhey mode again. I think what you're interested in is who it is. I read up on Project Rhey, the files you left behind in my clone facility. Foxtrot stepped forward, too. What did you do to Aggro? He asked. Nothing, I can assure you. Conchna sat up fully and grabbed his scythe. He leaned forward and used the scythe as a sort of cane to hold himself up as he stared down on the four of them. You want to see Project Rhey? Fine, he's in that room. Conchna gestured with the tip of his scythe. But only the Sentinel goes. Do you think we're stupid? Vax scoffed. This is obviously a trap. Is it? Oh wow, I hadn't noticed. Conchna said sarcastically. Fine, the rest of you can stand outside the room. There's only room for 2 in that cage anyway. The Sentinel didn't further the conversation and walked ahead to where Conchna had pointed. Sentinel, wait! Vax chased after him. I'm sick of talking to him. The Sentinel mumbled as he pressed forward. Quinn and Foxtrot followed. Conchna chuckled, watching as they walked right into his trap. The Sentinel approached the room labeled Project Rhey and opened the door. Sentinel, Vax spoke up. Be careful. The Sentinel nodded and closed the door behind him as he entered. Just as the door closed, a sound seemed to snap in place, like hydraulics. That's an airlock. Vax stared at the door. Wait, Foxtrot stepped forward. What's happening? Quinn asked. The door pulled away from the hallway, revealing it to be a port door in a small spaceship in a garage off the side of the palace. It pulled away quickly, not allowing Quinn, Vax, or Foxtrot much time to react before it sped off into the sky of Ilsos. Sentinel! Vax jumped forward. The room inside was dark, lit only by a lamp hanging from the ceiling. It illuminated the desk in front of the Sentinel. He seemed to be in an interrogation room of sorts. The room hummed constantly, hiding the fact from the Sentinel that it was moving, though the lamp on the ceiling swayed ever so slightly. He sat down at the nearest chair and looked around the room cautiously. He stared ahead of him, at where the other person in the room would be sitting if there was one. He squinted and noticed a blank screen staring back at him. He glanced down and saw a small remote sitting on the table in front of the screen, pointed at the Sentinel. He heard strange hissing noises and grew nervous. Hello? Was anyone there?
Yes.
A shrill voice called out from what sounded like speakers. The Sentinel looked around. Who's watching? He asked.
No one but me.
The voice spoke again. The screen flashed on to static. The Sentinel turned his head quickly, afraid of the sudden noise. His hands burst with plasmatic flames, ready to attack the noise.
Tisk, tisk, tisk. Sentinel, you're making this very easy for me. You're very, very paranoid. Keep your mind this broken and I'll be done with you quicker than Conchna could have ever hoped for.
The screen lit up before an animated yellow face jittered on it. The mangled mouth like that of a jack-o'-lantern and the soulless eyes of yellow static stared at the Sentinel. The strange screen flickered as the only dim light in the room brightened to reveal the full figure ahead of the Sentinel. Who are you? The Sentinel asked.
Rhey, nice to meet you.
The voice responded. The Sentinel stared at the figure before him. The screen was a helmet, it seemed, securely over the head of a man tied to his chair. The man before him, Rhey, wore a dark blue suit and bright yellow tie. His hands were tied behind his back, and the chain that held him in his chair seemed to move, slithering like a snake around him. The Sentinel recognized those chains all too well. They were Garstone, a plasma suppressant. Seeing the chains used on Rhey worried him. Who are you? The Sentinel asked, fear quaking in his voice. He cleared his throat to hide it.
Everyone keeps asking the same question, don't they? They ask it of you, of me, and of themselves. I'm sick of it. Aren't you?
The screen jittered, the mouth barely moved as it talked. Who
am I? Come to think of it, we aren't too different, you and me. I didn't want to exist, and I only exist because of you. You're the same way, aren't you?
Are you a clone? The Sentinel questioned, trying to assess the situation to his best ability.
Was.
The screen smiled.
You're smarter than I thought you'd be. I'm the chosen one, and that's that. Conchna chose me as a secret weapon because I have the power the Andromedans were looking for.
The voice stung at the Sentinel's ears as it spoke in a sing-songy way toward the end, its voice growing shriller by the moment. Plasma. The Sentinel spoke softly under his breath.
If only it were that simple.
Conchna, what the hell have you done? Honestly surprised, Conchna laughed as he stood from Vistor's throne. I confirmed for you that he was walking into a trap, and you let him walk right into it? I didn't think it'd be that kind of trap, Vax yelled. I didn't think it'd be that kind of... Conchna mocked Vax. Oh, shut up. He flung his scythe out. Vax reached out for her box floating by her shoulder and pushed it forward to Foxtrot and Quinn. Fox, get to the riptide. Chase the Sentinel down. Send the box back to me when you can. Foxtrot nodded. He held his hand out for Quinn, and the two of them flashed away. Vax turned around after they left and spread out her arms as they sparked a flame. Alright, Concha, you asked for it. Concha smiled as he lifted his scythe and slammed it down on the ground. A burst of plasmatic energy shot from the blade and whizzed past Vax as she dodged it and sent a flame flying his way.
So who am I, huh? Do you want what I'm supposed to be, or who I ended up being?
Rhey seemed to be toying with the Sentinel. Who were you supposed to be? The Sentinel asked.
I'm supposed to be his ticket to redemption in the eyes of the Andromedan elite. When you're stomped out under my foot, the Milky Way is left unguarded and prime for the Andromedans' return to take back what was originally theirs. It's about that time in our history where we start manifest destining the hell out of the universe.
But that isn't what Concha got, is it? The Sentinel asked.
Between you and me, he doesn't know he's been shortchanged yet.
The smile on Ray's screen widened.
He didn't think I'd have a mind of my own, especially after what he'd done to me. I know what I want and how I'm gonna get it. And, for just having been created and being locked up in this goddamn cage.
Rhey hit the table with his knee in anger.
I've still managed to make some useful friends all on my lonesome.
What do you mean? The Sentinel leaned forward.
That's for me to know, and for you and Concha to die, being none the wiser.
What do you want? I'm sure I can get it for you if you spare me. I can help you overthrow Concha if that's what you want. Revenge, maybe?
Don't take me for being a simpleton. I have greater ambitions than you could comprehend. But I know my place. I'm a pawn, a tool of a leader. I figure if I'm gonna be a pawn of a bad guy with ambitious plans, then they should at least have plans as ambitious as mine.
Rhey leaned forward in his seat, scooting the chair forward. The hanging lamp shook and flickered. The Sentinel scooted back a bit.
This universe is just as fragile as your mind. I'll break both. I'll use the weakness in the system to climb the ladder to ultimate power.
How are we supposed to chase the Sentinel down? Isn't he in another galaxy? Quinn questioned Foxtrot. Vax is boxing tracked the Sentinels. For some reason, it seems the ship's headed to us. Should we send the box back to Vax? Send it. Foxtrot nodded as he started the Riptide up and readied it for takeoff. Quinn sent the box off to retrieve Vax just as the Riptide sped off to the gate in Janistar's shield. Vax's box appeared between her and Concha as they were fighting. It distracted Concha enough for Vax to sweep her foot under his and knock him down. She grabbed her box and flashed away to the Riptide. She ran to the cockpit. Foxtrot shifted into the co-pilot seat when Vax sat down and plugged the box into the panel. It beeped, tracking where the Sentinel was. She grabbed the ship's levers and pushed down. The ship sped through the gate and into space. So what's the plan? Quinn asked. We board the ship the Sentinel's on and save him, Vax answered. Quinn waited for elaboration. And? That's it, Vax answered. Wow, intricate plan. So there's no way to get you on our side, the Sentinel asked Rhey.
Not in a million years.
Rhey smiled. So I'll have to kill you then. The Sentinel leaned forward, placing his hands on the table.
Not in a million years.
Ray's smile widened even further as he flicked his arms out. The anti-plasmatic chains flung from his wrist and shot out until they snaked their way over the Sentinel's arms, tying him down to the desk. The chains wrapped around him in the chair, holding him down. Rhey stood menacingly over the desk, holding his body up with his arms, and his ghastly animated face stared the Sentinel down.
Oh, didn't see that coming, did ya?
Rhey whipped his hand out and grabbed the remote off the desk. Get me out of here! The Sentinel shook in his chair, trying desperately to escape.
Say hello to your worst nightmares.
Rhey pointed the remote at the Sentinel's face, holding his arm across the table.
And goodbye to whatever light is left behind those eyes, at the touch of a button.
What do you have against me? The Sentinel grimaced as the chains wrapped around him and tightened themselves.
Nothing. It's fun to watch suffering. It's the boss that has the grudges.
Rhey smiled even wider. Constantine's made a mistake. The Sentinel scooted back in his chair.
He made over 1 billion mistakes, and he wiped all of them out because I was the one he needed.
Sentinel, can you hear me? A voice beckoned from outside the door nearest the Sentinel. Rhey turned his head and lowered the remote. He stared at the door in confusion, his animated smile fading slightly.
What?
He stared at the door, slamming his fist on the table.
How is that possible?
His voice shrieked. Let us in there! Foxtrot yelled, banging on the door.
Oh.
Rhey's smile quickly returned.
Oh, yes, Foxy, buddy old pal, is that you?
Rhey approached the door and opened it. The Riptide was connected to Rhey's ship by an extended corridor. Vax, Quinn, and Foxtrot stood back, scared. Foxtrot looked at Rhey inquisitively. Something about him was familiar. A clone position badge pinned on Rhey's collar told Foxtrot everything he needed to know. The badge read, in Andromedan, 1ARLO. Arlo? I thought you were dead. Foxtrot stepped forward. Foxtrot, get back! The Sentinel demanded, shaking in his chair, trying desperately to break free. He's not himself anymore. They've done something to him. He tried pulling with his calcareous arm to break free, only straining the chain slightly. I thought they killed him. Foxtrot stepped forward more, almost as if coming in for a hug.
Get over here, Foxy.
Rhey hugged him tight. What's with the suppressor helmet? Foxtrot laughed. He seemed genuinely happy, the most the Sentinel had seen him since they met. Foxtrot, please, he's not who you think, not anymore. The Sentinel warned him.
They killed Arlo, all right. He's nothing but a husk for me now.
Rhey sliced back with a long blade that extended from his sleeves as he shoved Foxtrot forward. The blade cut through his side and Foxtrot fell to his knees. Fox! Vax caught him as he fell. She flicked her arm up, sparking a small plasma explosion. Rhey flicked his wrist to the side, deflecting the flames. He turned his attention back to the Sentinel and pointed his remote at him. "Quinn, get Foxtrot to a hospital. Get him out of here." The Sentinel strained his arm even further, but the chains fought back, tightening themselves and wrapping around further. Quinn nodded and took hold of Vax's box, using it to flash her and Foxtrot away. Vax remained. She blasted a ball of plasma toward Rhey, which was swiftly deflected. She tried again, and again, it was deflected. She backed up and moved up and down on her toes, her fists up, ready for hand-to-hand combat. Rhey punched forward and slammed Vax into a wall. He turned around and pointed the remote at the Sentinel, pressing down on the button and smiling. The Sentinel's surroundings went dark. He looked down at himself, blue jeans, a red leather jacket, and a blue shirt. He looked up. "Amara?" "I died for you." What seemed to be Amara spoke softly in front of him. "That was a mistake." "No." The Sentinel held out his hand. "I never loved you. No one ever will." The Sentinel turned around, his jacket now a brown, worn coat. A bandana chafed his neck. "Why do you care so much for me?" Vax whispered as her first incarnation. "When I don't care for you at all. You should have let me die." "Vax." The Sentinel turned around again, his arms sleeved with blue flannel and his feet wearing red sneakers. "I did too. Until you killed me. It was all your fault." Matrona scolded the Sentinel. "You were the world to me, and you killed me. Do you still even care? What a father you were." The Sentinel couldn't bring words to his mouth. He held his hands to his head and struggled to even stand. He fell to his knees, crying into his arms. "Adam?" A small, innocent voice called out to him. The Sentinel looked down at his lab coat, khaki pants, and worn-out dress shoes. He lifted his head despite how weak he felt. A 5-year-old Matrona stood in front of him, clutching her journal. "Why do you hate me?" Darkness overtook the Sentinel's vision. He screamed but couldn't be heard wherever he was. He tried to scream louder just to hear himself, but the silence was deafening. He was alone, more alone than he'd ever felt. Years of isolation couldn't compare. His mind pulsated as memories he lost seemed to come back, if even for a moment, simply to taunt him. He envisioned himself in the Albuquerque bar, but watching as Kogar and Daru died before him, screaming for his help as he stood by helplessly. His face morphed with every face he'd had, his clothes an amalgamation of every outfit he'd worn. When it all went dark and silent again, a single spotlight shone before him. "Do you fear death? Embrace it? Laugh in the face of it?" A voice called out to him. "Look at yourself. Look at how many people you let down, how many people you let die. You're incompetent, a waste of human space." The voice that spoke to him seemed to be a mix of every voice the Sentinel ever spoke with, all scolding him. "Do the world a favor. Rid it of one more life.
You seem to be good at that."
Then the voices faded. It wasn't him anymore. It was Rhey. The blackness was gone, and the Sentinel opened his eyes. Rhey stood over him, watching his suffering. He held his hand to the Sentinel's forehead as if he were watching the visions play out alongside him. He inhaled and breathed out, satisfied with a job well done.
"Oh, yes."
He smiled. Sweat dripped down the Sentinel's forehead, his eyes were too red and dry for tears. His arms and legs shook, and his head pounded as hard and as fast as his heart did. He couldn't speak, but all he wanted to know was why. Vax sat against a wall in the corridor of her ship, defeated, confused, and scared. She didn't know why the Sentinel was acting the way he was, or what made him scream with more pain than when his arm was severed. "Let him go, Rhey," she pleaded. Rhey turned around, smiling, his screen flickering.
"What's in your mind, girl?"
"Don't." The Sentinel struggled to adjust himself, holding his head up, struggling as if it were a boulder. "Leave her alone, Rhey." "Vax!" Quinn flashed back into view. She yelled for her to get her attention. When Vax turned and saw Quinn, she unholstered her Andromedan pistols and tossed them to Quinn. Quinn grabbed the pistols and combined them into a rifle, then opened fire, no hesitation. Rhey deflected the laser fire with nothing more than a flick of his hand, while Quinn tried to land a hit. "Sentinel, fight back!" Quinn begged. She backed up slowly. Rhey was advancing on her, his grin growing wider, and his steps slow, calm, calculated. "I can't." The Sentinel stood up and looked down at his hands. "Sentinel, please!" Vax begged, also shooting at Rhey. Rhey pressed a button on his remote, and in an instant, Quinn and Vax fell to the ground. "Don't do that, not to them." The Sentinel flexed his calcareous arm, trying to break the chains.
"But it's so fun to watch."
Rhey shrugged, glancing over his shoulder at the Sentinel.
"It's not like I'm killing them, like you will."
His hands seemed to be glowing with a near-invisible flame, like a mirage in a hot desert. "Ben!" Quinn shivered on the floor. "Rhey, stop this, now."
"Make me."
Rhey smiled a sinister grin.
"What's stopping you? Kill me. It's what you're good at."
Rhey opened his arms out as a sort of invitation, giving the Sentinel a clear shot. "Mom, Dad." Vax looked around. The Sentinel could tell she was hallucinating the same way he had. "I'm sorry." Vax's jaw quivered and tears streamed down her face. "Let them go!" The Sentinel swung his arm, shattering part of the chain. It wrapped around, trying to subdue him again, but he grabbed it with his calcareous arm and held it out away from him. It snapped at him like a snake striking at its prey. The Sentinel pushed forward, blasting Rhey with a quick pulse of plasma, pushing him to the ground. The remote dropped to the floor, and the Sentinel picked it up. He pointed it at Rhey and pressed the button, still holding the chains away from him. Rhey laughed, holding his stomach and smiling.
Yes, yes! Keep going, I love it! Pain is my joy, Sentinel. You can't hurt me, because I like it.
Rhey launched himself up with an agile jump off his back and approached the Sentinel, kicked him in the groin, and grabbed the remote back from him.
Go on, hurt me. It's what I want.
Sentinel, we have to go. Vax struggled to stand, helping Quinn up. Her eyes looked into the Sentinel's, pleading. I can't leave without knowing Rhey can't hurt anyone. The Sentinel looked up at him. But I can't kill him. Why not? Vax yelled. The Sentinel stared back, speechless. He was drawing a blank, when suddenly everything around him went silent. Darkness. A faint ringing in his ears, bright lights and muffled screams. This was all the Sentinel could process for a few moments. He sat up quickly on the floor again. He rubbed his eyes and pushed himself back as quickly as he could. Near him, Quinn and Vax held onto each other for safety, using their legs as a means by which to hold themselves in their position, both pushed up against the wall of the room. It took the Sentinel a while to realize that the floor beneath him was shifting at an angle. The riptide was no longer connected to the ship, and a hole had been blasted in the wall beside him. He was hanging out of the hole left from an explosion. He looked down and watched as the table that was once in the room fell, the chain with it. His false hand acted as his only grip. His fingers penetrated the metallic floor, anchoring him in. He finally managed to speak. We're on a ship? The Sentinel turned around. It took him a while to process, but there had been an explosion, bursting a hole in the ship. Sentinel, get us out of here! Quinn screamed. Where are we? The Sentinel looked out over the edge of the hole, which he was sitting dangerously close to, especially at the angle the ship was tilted. Sentinel, we should get back. Vax tried to stay calm. Where's Rhey? Whose ship are we on? The Sentinel adjusted his grip and pushed himself up toward the door. Vax and Quinn were standing against the wall now. The riptide pulled up near the blast hole, and clearly visible in the cockpit was Foxtrot. He gestured for them as a hatch opened near the cockpit. Fox? Vax seemed surprised. How does he expect us to get in there? Quinn scoffed. I'm not jumping. The Sentinel quickly let go of his grip, sliding down the metal. His trajectory was off course for the riptide. He pushed himself with a blast of plasma, turned around, and launched his box from his palm, hitting Quinn in the arm and teleporting her. Vax flashed away with her own box. The Sentinel grasped himself onto the riptide with his metal hand and watched the ship he had just abandoned. The blast hole was on fire, and they were in some sort of atmosphere, not empty space. The ship dove down and seemed to hit some sort of invisible force and exploded in a fiery blast. The Sentinel shielded his face. The flames came too close for comfort. He used his metal arm to fling himself into the riptide and close the hatch. No, you need to go back right now. You can't be flying a ship like this, not in the condition you're in. Vax, I'll be fine, Foxtrot assured Vax, piloting the ship with one hand and holding his bandaged wound with the other. Where are we? You got to us quick. The Sentinel sat down and took his box back from Quinn, snapping it into his palm slot. He held his metal wrist, comforting it. He could feel pain in it shooting up his arm. Just outside of Janistar's borders, Foxtrot sighed. He punched a code into the communication panel in front of him, and far ahead of them the gate on Janistar started to open. You called him Arlo. The Sentinel coughed, holding his head. Who's Arlo?